Hi again. We're back with this same image that we just composited in the other image. So I wanted to walk you through some of the steps that I do when I edit my newborns. I do not do a lot of extensive work to my newborns. Pretty much just removing major blemishes, scratches, marks. And if they're overly red or overly yellow, I'll correct that. But for the most part, between proper lighting, proper exposure, proper white balance, they look pretty good coming straight out of the camera. This is straight out of the camera in the essence of the color. Again, we did fix the composite. Okay, so let's get going. This was the composite that we just did, so I'm just going to flatten the image so we're back to a nice starting point. The first thing I'm going to do, this little girl was super tiny, so her arms didn't I like when the arms come straight down. So for the most part, I try to get that in camera, but she was a little wiggly and just wasn't exactly having it. So I'm going to duplicate my background layer by hitting Command J on my keyboard, and then I'm going to go into Liquify. To do that, select Filter and then Liquify. And make sure you have your push, the first one, selected. And I like to try to use as big of big of a circle as possible. It makes it slightly less noticeable. And I can't do this a ton, or she does start to look a little funny, but I'm just going to try to push her a little bit to make it not look like she was falling over. So by moving this arm over a tiny bit, and again, this one, I don't want this one to get big. She's leaning a little bit, so when I crop, I can straighten that out a little as well, but I just want to try to work on this line because I like to have as straight of a line as possible from the forehead, nose, lips, down the arms. She was kind of sucking her lip in a bit as well, so just kind of straighten that out as well. Again, and I'm doing all of this just with the push option. I'm sure it has an official name. I always call it forward warp tool is its official name. I like to just call it the push tool. Okay, so that looks pretty good there. And also her headband wasn't fitting well, so I'm just going to smush this in a little bit as well. I'll probably add a little more hair there to kind of hide that. And I also probably won't use that headband again because every time I use it, it kind of gives me some issues. I think when I hop out of here, I'm just going to Photoshop a little more hair right there. Okay, so that looks pretty good there. Again, and we didn't do a ton. She was just leaning, you could see a little bit, and we straightened her out. I think I'm going to bring her back in one more time and make it a little bit straighter. Okay, once I get that the way I like it, I'm going to flatten that as well. This blanket has creases naturally, but some of them I'm going to want to use the patch tool to remove. So again, I'm going to select Command J to duplicate my layer, and then I'm going to select the patch tool. And anywhere I see wrinkles, I'm going to grab the patch tool, highlight it, and then just drag it over. Again, some of these are natural to the fabric, but I can see these ones down here were not, and this one over here was not. So I just want to remove as much of that as I can just so it doesn't grab your eye. And I try really hard not to shoot on wrinkled fabric because it does make editing kind of a nightmare. Every once in a while it gets away from you, but I work really hard to make sure that I pull my fabrics tight so I don't have to deal with that in post-processing. Okay, once that looks good, now I'm going to zoom in a little bit by selecting Command and then the plus bar so I can really see what her skin is doing. Again, I'm going to add another layer by Command J, and still with my patch tool, I just want to clean up her face a little bit. She has some scratches here, so if you select the scratch, you can slide it over to clean areas of the skin, and you can clean up her skin pretty quickly that way. Now, she's a newborn. I don't go crazy on removing every single little dot. I love the bumps on newborns' noses. I just think that's kind of part of who they were. So I quite often tell parents that I don't make them look like porcelain dolls, but you know, little eye goobs we'll get rid of. Um, you know, if she had major acne, I would get rid of it, but I'm going to leave the rest of it. That's a pretty big scratch. Okay, so as far as blemishes, you can see, you know, I just pulled the major ones off so that when we go to edit, it's a little easier. Once I'm happy with that, I can flatten the image again. And again, this hairline is just kind of bothering me, so I'm going to duplicate the layer. I'm going to grab my clone tool. I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to see what it looks like just by adding a little hair here to kind of close the gap, just to make it not so obvious that the headband didn't fit perfectly. Yeah, and I'm happier with that. It just doesn't grab my eye anymore. Okay, now I'm going to start working on her skin. I use Greater Than Gatsby Newborn Collection 2 with all of my newborns. When you purchase the action, I mean, there's hundreds of little actions in there, and I only use 2. The 2 that I use are in the Retouch toolkit, and I use Redness Replacer. Maybe I use more than 2. I use Redness Replacer a lot, sometimes Pluck the Purple, and every once in a while reduce the jaundice and paint on light if I need it. And that's it. I really don't play with the other ones. I'm kind of a less is more kind of girl. So I always start by running Redness Replacer. And it automatically keeps it as black. I'm going to paint at 100% opacity with a white brush. Now I usually suggest not running actions at 100%, but this one isn't too strong, but I usually paint it on really strong so that I can back it off. And I'm definitely, because I'm kind of working fast, I'm going over and hitting the blanket, which I don't want to do. So once I do that, I switch my mask to black, and then I can get back in closer and kind of fix where I messed up. This mom requested fall colors. I don't always shoot on colors this dark. This is kind of a tricky color to shoot on because it does kick a lot of red and oranges back up onto the baby's skin, which can make it really hard. But it was the mom's request. Again, I use the slash key a lot just to make sure that I'm not missing or going too far. Okay, so just you can get a sense of that was before, that's after. Now this is way too much redness removed. And I also need to put the red back into her lips because I don't want her to look like a ghost. Now she looks like Snow White, so I'm going to reduce. Hold on, I see a little more here that I need to kind of bring back. I'm going to reduce the overall opacity now, probably, this is 70%. I think her skin is looking pretty good there. I'm going to come back in to some of these specific areas and hit it again. So I'm going to flatten that one to start. And now I'm going to go to Pluck the Purple, and you can see kind of in her wrists and on her forearms. Now this one I do run a lot lower. I start this one. She's not very purple. I'm going to start it. I mean, there's no exact science. 20% opacity, maybe 50% flow, and see what that looks like. When you're running actions and utilizing the brush tool, it has a building up effect. So the more you kind of brush on, the more you're building up that color removal. So that's why it's always best to start pretty low and then build up. Now her little feet are purple. Babies always have purple feet in Froggy. It really doesn't bother me. I think the bottoms of feet are pink, so it doesn't bother me. This back leg often gets a little shadowy. Again, it's in the shadow, and that doesn't bother me. Okay, I'm thinking that looks pretty good. Maybe hit this leg a little more. And you can see before and after. Again, not a huge difference, but we're pulling the purple out of her arms and her hands. At this point, I want to tackle the side here, so I'm going to duplicate the layer, grab my clone tool. I'm going to make it pretty big. I'm just going to select here and swipe that area, so that gets that covered pretty quickly. I also like, this is a pretty textured background, so I think I wanted a tiny bit smoother. So I'm going to grab my eyedropper tool. I hit I on my keyboard. There's two. There's the eyedropper and there's the color sampler. The difference is if you hit the eyedropper, you're actually going to pick up the color, and you can see it go into your color box over here. And if you pick color sampler, it's just going to put a marker down and then tell you your RGB values. So for this example, we want the eyedropper, which actually fills up the eyedropper. And that's going to put the color here. And then we are going to do a solid color fill. So I select my, I always call it the black and white cookie over here, and then select solid color. And this is the one we picked, so we say okay. So this covers the whole image with that one color from the blanket. Now you want to select the white mask over here in your layers menu, and then you want to make sure that your black mask is showing on top. And then hit your gradient tool, start at the bottom of your image, and just drag up. What this is doing, and actually I'm going to drag up a little higher, it's putting a graduated filter of that orange onto your image, and it's reducing it. That's what the black mask is for, from the bottom to the top. So clearly we can't leave it like this. So at this point you want your black mask on, and we want to mask off the baby. I'm going to make sure you bump up your opacity to 100%. So you always have to make sure you get it, whoops, you always have to make sure you get it off the baby at 100%, and then we're going to work on the edges. You never want your baby to look like they're glowing when you do this, so take your time. I probably would go a little slower if I was doing this for a client, but I don't want you to have to watch me do this the whole time. Again, hitting your slash key, you can see where you've masked or where you may have missed. And that looks pretty good right now. I also, same thing, kind of turn it on and off, and then you can quickly see where you might be missing removing it. So once you get it off the bulk of the baby, then I reduce my opacity to about 50% for opacity and 50% for the flow. And I get a much bigger brush, and I kind of come out a little bit. This just makes it a bit more gradual around the baby. And I like the natural shadowing we get from where we have our light placement, so I don't want to cover that up. So I always brush off there too. And then I might reduce the opacity a little bit. Again, I don't want it as a super strong solid fill, but I do like to smooth out, especially on this more textured background. I do like to smooth it out a little bit. So right now I'm at 75%, and I think I like that. And then I'm going to flatten that. Now all I have left to do is run some skin smoothing. So I have portraiture. There's a lot of different skin smoothing options you can use. This is just one of them that I kind of found in the beginning, and I kind of like it. So when you're in portraiture, if it's new to you, you pick the sampler tool and you sample on the skin, and then you can see here the areas that are going to be affected. And then once it runs, again, I click on that layer and I add a mask again. And now I'm going, right now it's applied everywhere, which is too much. So I'm going to invert the mask and then paint on with a white brush. And I'm just going to quickly paint over the whole baby And then I'm going to use my black brush to erase it from places where I don't want it smooth. You know, her hair, her headband, her eyebrows. So right now I'm brushing off anywhere that I don't want it smooth. All the creases, like the little fingers, toes. You can see here all the areas that I've masked it off of. So eyelashes, eyebrows, nose, lips, fingers, toes. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity. I have it run pretty high, and then I typically turn it down. You want them to look soft, but not plastic. So that's it. That would be the typical flow for baby on the beanbag. And I did notice when I was looking at some of the other videos that in QuickTime Player, I feel like the color gets a little weird. So hopefully it looks okay on your end when you're watching it. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. You know, tag me in the forums, and we can kind of get that all covered.